6 Stanley Cups, a Conn Smythe, a Calder, a Hall of Fame career. Ken Dryden wasn't just a goalie, he was hockey's philosopher, the mind behind the mask. Calm, analytical, unshakable, the man who studied greatness even as he defined it. But even a legend like Dryden didn't rise alone. Behind his poise stood 6 men who challenged him, inspired him, and helped shape the calm giant of Montreal. Some were rivals, some were heroes, some were brothers in battle. As Dryden once said, hockey isn't about the puck, it's about people. And these 6 people built the man behind the mask. Jacques Plante, the innovator who made masks normal. Before Ken Dryden became the calm, analytical giant who guarded Montreal's net, there was one man who laid the intellectual foundation for what goaltending could be, Jacques Plante. To Dryden, Plante wasn't just an idol, he was a revelation. In an era where goalies were expected to simply react, Plante thought. He was a tactical genius who treated hockey like an equation, analyzing angles, shooter tendencies, and the geometry of the crease long before analytics became part of the sport's vocabulary. Plante's brilliance wasn't loud, it was methodical, born from hours of solitary study, charts, and quiet rebellion. When he first took the ice wearing a mask on November 1st, 1959, after being struck in the face by a puck, it wasn't just an act of self-preservation, it was an act of evolution. The world saw protection, Dryden saw progress. That night changed hockey forever. For the first time, a goaltender refused to sacrifice intellect for bravado. He made logic visible, and in doing so, made courage smarter. By the time Dryden joined the Canadiens a decade later, Plante had long since moved on, but his influence lingered everywhere. In the design of the pads, in the quiet confidence of the coaching staff, even in the way goalies carried themselves during practice. Dryden studied Plante like a scientist studying a mentor's unfinished notes. He replayed film of his movements, memorized his angles, and even imitated his mannerisms, the way Plante stood tall before a shot, the way he absorbed chaos instead of flinching from it. Dryden once said, Plante played as if he'd already seen the next 5 seconds of every play. That's what fascinated him. Plante had turned goaltending into foresight. For Dryden, Plante represented something deeply personal. Proof that being a thinker in a physical world wasn't weakness, but power. In an NHL dominated by aggression, Plante's weapon was discipline. He didn't dive, he didn't scramble, he calculated. Dryden would later confess that as a young goalie at Cornell, he tried to mimic that serenity, the sense that every movement had purpose. He didn't want to just stop pucks, he wanted to understand them. But here's the twist, the quiet shock that reveals Dryden's humanity beneath the intellect. When he finally made the Canadiens roster in 1970, equipment managers offered him a newly designed fiberglass mask modeled on Plante's original. Everyone assumed Dryden, the scholar of goaltending, would wear it instantly, but he didn't. He hesitated. For the first few practices, he played barefaced. Reporters thought it was confidence. Teammates thought it was habit. In truth, Dryden admitted years later he wasn't sure if he'd earned it yet. I needed to feel what Plante felt, he said. The fear, the exposure, the choice. That revelation stunned hockey fans when he wrote about it decades later. The man who idolized Plante's intellect had, for a moment, chosen danger, just to understand the courage behind the logic. It wasn't that Dryden doubted the mask's value. He doubted his right to inherit it. He wanted to feel, even briefly, what it meant to stand unprotected in the line of fire and still stay calm. In that decision lay the essence of both men, courage guided by thought. Eventually, Dryden embraced the mask, and with it, Plante's philosophy. The mask was never just a shield. It was a declaration. It said that thinking was strength, that progress wasn't cowardice, and that the future belonged to those who questioned tradition. Every time Dryden lowered himself into the crease, steady as a metronome, he was living proof of Plante's revolution. Logic triumphing over chaos, discipline mastering fear. Jacques Plante didn't just save faces, he saved minds. He proved that reason could coexist with bravery. Plante taught him that logic could save lives, but the next man would teach him that instinct could save dynasties. Bobby Orr, the rival who redefined perfection. There are players who play hockey, and then there was Bobby Orr, the man who seemed to redefine gravity itself. For Ken Dryden, Orr wasn't just another opponent. He was the living embodiment of speed, creativity, and courage all colliding in motion. Orr changed the way the game looked, not just for fans, but for the men tasked with stopping him. He was a defenseman who attacked like a forward, a force who could turn a neutral zone into chaos with one effortless glide. When Dryden faced Orr and the Boston Bruins in the early 1970s, he wasn't staring at just a rival, he was confronting evolution. Orr was hockey accelerated, refined, distilled to something pure. Every stride, every fake, every flash of blonde hair beneath that helmet carried intent. You could sense him coming before you saw him, Dryden once recalled. The ice itself seemed to shift. Their legendary duel in the 1971 playoffs remains etched in hockey mythology. The Canadiens, underdogs, faced Orr's powerhouse Bruins. Orr attacked relentlessly, circling behind his own net, exploding through defenders, orchestrating plays at a tempo that bordered on supernatural. Dryden, barely out of Cornell, faced a blizzard of shots from the most dominant offense in the league. Game after game, Orr would weave through the blue line, and Dryden, impossibly calm, would track him like a chess master predicting 10 moves ahead. Montreal would go on to win that series, and many called it the night the student outlasted the teacher. But Dryden never saw it that way, because deep down, something else was happening in those moments of chaos. Something Dryden never admitted until years later. He wasn't terrified, he was in awe. Watching Orr wasn't like facing an opponent. It was like witnessing the future of hockey unfold in real time. Orr didn't just move faster, he thought faster. His passes came from angles that didn't exist until he created them. Dryden once confessed that in those split seconds when Orr surged toward him, there was a flicker of admiration mixed with fear, as if I was watching hockey's next evolutionary step, he said. That revelation shocked fans who saw Dryden as the embodiment of composure. The stoic goaltender who shut down legends was, and in truth, mesmerized by one. But it explained everything. Why Dryden's style grew more patient, more cerebral after facing Orr. He began anticipating the impossible, studying patterns like Orr did, transforming himself from a reactive goalie into an architect of anticipation. Orr didn't just score goals against Dryden, he rewired him. Off the ice, Dryden often wrote about beauty in motion, and you could tell Orr's image haunted every word. He represented everything Dryden believed about perfection, not mechanical precision, but art under pressure. Orr reminded him that greatness wasn't sterile, it was alive, reckless, full of risk. And that paradox, the balance between intellect and instinct, became the heartbeat of Dryden's philosophy. Orr redefined what perfection looked like on the ice. And in doing so, he forced Dryden to redefine what perfection felt like in the crease. Facing him wasn't a battle, it was a lesson. Orr's skating, his creativity, his relentless push for control inside chaos. All of it became the standard Dryden measured himself against for the rest of his career. If Orr showed Dryden perfection in motion, the next man showed him perfection under pressure. Tony Esposito, the rival who made him hate, losing every great goaltender needs a mirror. Someone who reflects their strengths, exposes their flaws, and forces them to sharpen their edge. For Ken Dryden, that mirror was Tony Esposito. In the 1970s, when the NHL was dominated by finesse and fear, these two stood apart. Tall, composed, unshakable. Dryden, the intellectual fortress of Montreal. Esposito, the calculating machine of Chicago. Their rivalry wasn't loud or theatrical. It was cold, surgical, and unrelenting. Every time the Canadiens met the Blackhawks, the air in the arena felt heavier. Fans didn't just watch a game, they watched a duel between two chess players separated by 200 feet of ice. Both goalies studied each other's habits, like scientists examining rival formulas. Esposito's butterfly technique, his cat-like slides across the crease, his uncanny reflexes, they fascinated Dryden. He wasn't facing a man, he was facing a reflection of himself, one that moved with equal precision, but played with a fire Dryden rarely allowed himself to show. Their duels became the stuff of psychological warfare. Montreal's dynastic offense, Lafleur, Schutt, Lemaire, would crash Esposito's net, and still he stood tall, unflinching, stoic as a glacier, and at the other end, Dryden would return the favor, smothering the Hawks' surges, led by Stan Mikita and Bobby Hull. Games between them often ended with both goaltenders barely blinking, their emotion buried under layers of discipline, yet every save from Esposito carried a subtle defiance, a daring flair that contrasted Dryden's calm geometry. Dryden later admitted that playing against Esposito was like playing against his own standards. He made efficiency look emotional, he wrote. That line summed up what made their rivalry so magnetic. Esposito wasn't reckless, but he was alive. Where Dryden's calm came from thought, Esposito's came from instinct, and in that contrast, Dryden found both admiration and irritation. Then came the moment that shattered Dryden's detachment. Years later, while writing his personal notes for the game, he unearthed a forgotten diary entry from the height of the rivalry. In it, Dryden confessed something startling. He envied Tony Esposito. Not his reflexes, not his wins, his emotion. Esposito shouted after saves, slammed his stick after goals, barked at defenders when they lost coverage. Dryden never did any of that. Behind his famous stoicism was a man who often wanted to explode, to release, to feel the game the way Esposito did. That revelation shocked fans when it surfaced decades later. The cerebral goaltender, always perceived as detached and analytical, secretly longed for the rawness he saw in his rival. Tony could lose and still look human, Dryden wrote. When I lost, I just looked wrong. It was jealousy, pure and simple, but not the poisonous kind. It was the kind that fuels greatness. Esposito made Dryden hate losing, not because of the loss itself, but because of what losing revealed. That maybe emotion was not the enemy of control, but its partner. That maybe passion could coexist with precision. Their rivalry would stretch through the decade, each man collecting Vezina trophies and respect in equal measure. But in truth, every save Esposito made was a challenge, every glance a quiet dare. Dryden would walk off the ice after those games exhausted, not from the physical toll, but from the mental tug-of-war with his own reflection. Tony Esposito wasn't just a rival, he was a reminder that behind every calm exterior, even behind a legend's mask, there beats a storm of pride, envy, and hunger. Esposito made him feel something dangerous, jealousy. The next man would make him feel something rarer, reverence. If you're loving how these rivalries shape the legends behind the mask, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more untold stories from hockey's golden era. We're only halfway through Ken Dryden's circle of greatness, and trust me, the next names will surprise you even more. Jacques Béliveau, the captain who embodied grace for Ken Dryden. No player represented the soul of the Montreal Canadiens more than Jacques Béliveau. To Dryden, Béliveau wasn't just a teammate, he was the embodiment of what it meant to wear the C. In an era defined by swagger and showmanship, Béliveau led with something far rarer grace. He didn't command, he inspired. He didn't demand respect. He earned it simply by being himself. By the time Dryden joined the Canadiens in 1970, Béliveau was already a living monument, 2 decades into a career that had made him the face of class in the NHL. He had lifted cups, broken records, and guided dynasties, but never once let the burden of greatness touch his humility. He was the kind of captain who remembered the names of locker room attendants and thanked rookies for effort instead of results. Dryden would often say that playing behind Béliveau was like standing in the shadow of calm perfection. He watched how Béliveau carried the team after losses, never raising his voice, never showing anger, always listening. To a young goaltender searching for balance between intellect and instinct, Béliveau was a revelation, the perfect equilibrium between authority and empathy. But what struck Dryden most wasn't Béliveau's goals or assists, it was his restraint. He led not by words, but by presence. When a game spiraled out of control, Béliveau's very posture on the bench upright, unhurried, seemed to reset the team's heartbeat. Players followed him because they trusted him, not because they feared him. Then came a moment that haunted Dryden for years. It was during a tense playoff series early in his career, one of those nights where the Forum crowd buzzed with anxiety and every mistake felt fatal. Late in the third period, with Montreal clinging to a 1-goal lead, Béliveau skated over to Dryden during a timeout. He spoke softly, urging him to hold the puck more, to slow the tempo, to kill the Bruins' rhythm. Dryden nodded, but moments later, on instinct, he did the exact opposite. He caught a shot, saw an open winger, and fired the puck up ice to spark a rush of play that led to a turnover and nearly cost them the game. The Canadiens survived, but Dryden didn't. In the dressing room afterward, he waited for Béliveau's reaction of a scolding, a stare, something. But Béliveau just smiled, patted his shoulder, and said quietly, "Good decision, just the wrong time." That single line cut deeper than any reprimand ever could. It was forgiveness without anger, disappointment without punishment. Dryden carried that moment for years, replaying it whenever he thought about leadership and humility. It was the lesson no coach could teach, that real authority doesn't come from control, but from compassion. Béliveau could correct you without breaking you. That night, Dryden realized that Béliveau wasn't just the Canadiens' captain, he was its conscience. He showed that greatness wasn't only about winning, but about how you carried yourself while doing it. The respect Béliveau earned was the kind that lingered, shaping every generation that followed him. Jacques Béliveau gave Ken Dryden a model of quiet strength, proof that leadership could be soft-spoken, that grace could coexist with dominance. He showed that in the heart of chaos, composure wasn't the absence of fire, but the mastery of it. Béliveau gave him grace under fire, but the next legend would give him fire itself. Larry Robinson, the teammate who completed the fortress. Every dynasty has its cornerstone, and for Ken Dryden, that cornerstone wore number 19. Larry Robinson, the towering defenseman known for his calm ferocity and impossible consistency, was more than a teammate. He was the silent engineer of the Canadiens' fortress. When Dryden looked out from his crease during the Canadiens' run from 1976 to 1979, he didn't just see defensemen, he saw Larry Robinson, the foundation of control, the embodiment of balance between strength and grace. Robinson wasn't flashy. He didn't need to be. His game was pure economy and Sportcrum. One stride instead of 3, one stick check instead of a hit. He was the rare defenseman who could make chaos feel choreographed. When opponents crashed the net, Robinson never panicked. His positioning was surgical, his timing flawless. Dryden used to say that Robinson made the ice feel smaller because he always seemed to be in two places at once. Together, they formed an unspoken alliance. Dryden was the wall, Robinson was the perimeter. There were no hand signals, no shouted instructions, just intuition, a mutual understanding of geometry and trust. When Robinson stepped up, Dryden adjusted. When Dryden held the line, Robinson retreated. It was rhythm, not reaction, like jazz between intellect and instinct. During the Canadiens' 1976-79 run, their partnership became the spine of the dynasty. Montreal didn't just win games, they set them easy. They suffocated opponents. Dryden would later describe those seasons as the calmest years of my career, because with Robinson on the ice, he never felt exposed. Every rebound was cleared, every passing lane choked. Together, they turned high-danger chances into routine saves. Robinson didn't just defend, he erased danger before it existed. But what most fans didn't know, and what Dryden wouldn't reveal until decades later, was that deep down, he believed Larry Robinson was the real MVP of that era. Not Lafleur with his goals, not Savard with his spins, not Dryden himself with the mask and mystique. It was Robinson, the quiet guardian who held the dynasty together while others took the spotlight. That revelation came in a 2000s interview when Dryden finally admitted what he'd always felt. I got too much credit. Larry was the reason the wall never cracked. It was a shocking confession from a man known for his composure, but it revealed something profound. Dryden's understanding that even legends depend on anchors. Behind his calm confidence was a faith built entirely on Robinson's reliability. Their connection wasn't just tactical, it was emotional. Dryden once recalled a playoff game where he gave up a rare bad goal, a soft shot through the pads. As he skated back to the bench for the intermission, he didn't look up. Then Robinson tapped his pads and said quietly, "That's one. They won't get two." Montreal won 3-1. That sentence, Dryden said later, was leadership distilled. No lecture, no pity, just certainty. When Dryden retired after the 1979 season, he knew his dynasty would live on, not in his saves, but in the standards that Robinson kept alive. Robinson went on to mentor a new generation, proving that his steadiness wasn't just physical, it was cultural. Larry Robinson wasn't the loudest, flashiest, or most celebrated. He was something better, inevitable. He completed the wall, not by standing beside it, but by becoming part of it. Robinson built the wall beside him, but the next man would build the legacy beyond him. Patrick Roy, the successor who carried the torch. When Ken Dryden retired from the Montreal Canadiens in 1979, he left behind more than a dynasty. He left behind an ideal, the calm, the intellect, the discipline that turned chaos into control. For years, fans wondered if anyone could ever live up to that. Then in 1986, a 20-year-old kid from Quebec City stepped into the crease, fiery, fearless, and utterly unlike Dryden in every way. His name was Patrick Roy, and whether he knew it or not, he was about to carry Dryden's torch into the modern age. Roy didn't resemble Dryden's quiet composure. He screamed, gestured, barked at refs, pumped his fists at crowds. He wore his emotion like armor. But behind that fire was the same mental sharpness Dryden revered, the same ability to see the game 2 steps ahead. In Roy, Dryden saw a new era, a goaltender who fused intellect with intensity. The 1986 playoffs were Roy's coronation. Just a rookie, he led the Canadiens to a Stanley Cup with poise beyond his years. He didn't play like a kid learning history. He played like he was history. Dryden, then in the press box as a commentator, couldn't help but watch with fascination. Roy's movements were aggressive, defiant yet perfectly calculated. He didn't protect the net, Dryden once said admiringly. He owned it. Then came 1993, the year Roy elevated himself into legend. 4 overtime wins, the wink against Thomas Sandstrom, the sheer audacity of confidence that echoed through Montreal like a battle cry. And somewhere, quietly, Dryden smiled. Because even though their temperaments couldn't have been more different, Roy was doing what Dryden always believed goalies should do, control the game with presence. But what no one knew at the time, and what Dryden would only reveal years later, was that behind that smile was something else, envy. He privately admitted that Roy's swagger fascinated him. He had the kind of boldness I never allowed myself, Dryden once confessed in an interview. I studied the game, Patrick owned it. That revelation stunned fans who had always seen Dryden as the ultimate composed thinker. The man who wrote essays about hockey's soul had admired a player who turned goaltending into theater. Roy played with unfiltered emotion, and Dryden couldn't look away. He saw in Roy something elemental, the next step in the evolution of the position he once ruled. Roy didn't hide his humanity behind a mask of intellect. He weaponized it. Watching Roy lift the cup again in '93, Dryden realized something profound. The very lesson his own career had been building toward. Greatness isn't cloned, it evolves. Each generation rewrites the story, using what came before as a foundation, not a formula. Dryden's calm had taught the world that intellect could rule instinct. Waugh's fire taught it that emotion, when controlled, could burn just as bright. Two goalies, two eras, one. Unbroken lineage. Dryden was the mind. Waugh was the heart. Together, they formed the complete philosophy of goaltending. Thought and fury in perfect harmony. Dryden realized that greatness evolves, not repeats, and that his reflection in Waugh was hockey's final proof that legends forge legends. Ken Dryden's story isn't just about saves, cups, or trophies. It's about the people who shaped the man behind the mask. From Jacques Plante's innovation to Bobby Orr's perfection, from Tony Esposito's fire to Jahan Béliveau's grace, from Larry Robinson's strength to Patrick Waugh's audacity, each left a mark on Dryden's mind and spirit. They weren't just opponents or teammates, they were chapters in his education, the living proof that greatness is never solitary. Dryden's legacy was forged in reflection, rivalry, and reverence. Because in hockey, as in life, greatness recognizes greatness, and legends forge legends. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. If this journey through Ken Dryden's world moved you, then don't stop here. Subscribe now and join our community of true hockey historians. Drop a comment below. Which of these 6 legends do you think shaped Dryden the most? Because in this channel, we don't just watch hockey, we remember it.